All right, before we get going here on this new chapter on data sets and sort of the ethics behind data sets, I want to have you do a warm-up question here first based on array lists. So pause the video and give this a shot. All right, so basically old list has in this order A, B, C like that, and we want to create C, B, A, and then A, B, C. And so like looking at these choices, I just kind of go through the choices. And I'm pretty sure A is out because it just adds them twice. So it would get the first, in old list, the first thing would be A, and then it adds it twice. So it'd be AA, and then it gets the next one, which would be B, and then BB, and then get C into CC. And that's not what we want here. So this one's maybe a contender. So let's look. So it would get A first, and then add it. When you do just not add, it just adds it to the end. So since it's blank, it just adds it there. And then it adds in spot 0 an A. So now it looks like that. The next time through, it'll get B. And it adds B to the end here. And then it adds B in spot 0 to the list. So it would add it there. That's starting to look like what we want. And then the next time through, it would be C. And then it would add C to the end of the list, and then also add it at spot 0. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay, and then maybe just to confirm that these other ones aren't any good, it looks like this is just doing it without an enhanced for loop, so just a regular old loop. And here, it's going to get A first and add spot, so J is 0, so it gets 0. So this one's going to add A every time. So it would go A, and then it would spot J would be 0, so I'd add another A. And then when J becomes 1, it's going to add another A to the end, and then add what spot J, which is now 1, which would be, here's the original list. 1 would be a B, so it's going to add like that. So it's going to add A way too many times. Yeah, that one's out. And then this one, so J would be 0, and it would add in spot 0 the item in from old list 0, so that would be an A. And then it adds in spot 0 old list 0, so that'd be A again. This one looks kind of like a contender. Let's keep checking here. So next up, J would become 1, so it adds in spot 1 the value at 1. So here's our list. So in spot 1, it's going to put a B, and then it's going to push this one over, so that's going to be A there. And then now it adds in spot 0 this B value. So sorry, this would be here. But then it adds in spot 0. Oh, so yeah, it's going to look like that now. So it's going to add it in spot 0, which would shift so we're BA, BA, which is not really going to match what we want. So I think this one's almost like mixing them together. So the right one there should be B. Okay. Anyways, next thing we're going to do here, today's lesson is to start to read and write to files in Java. And this is just part of this idea of data sets. So this whole chapter is about like different sets of data. And oftentimes when you have a huge set of data, like think of all the students in our campus program, that's stored in what's called data sets. And they can be, basically, it's like a giant Excel file. Like if you picture Excel or Google Sheets where you have like rows and columns of data, right? You have a whole bunch of them. And each one of these would be like student 1, all their data would be in the first row. Then you have student 2 here, right? And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you'd have each piece of data for each student stored here. And so generally in a computer program, you've got a ton of data behind the scenes. And you can think of it as like an Excel table. More commonly, it's actually something called a database, which is just like a giant set of data that the program can access and manipulate and change, right? Like in this campus example, like you might have your grades in here, and those are constantly changing based on assignments getting added. Okay, so this is a super big topic that we're briefly going to talk about in this chapter. But then in real life applications, you would have all sorts of classes and information where you learn more about data sets. Okay, so just a basic, what is a data set here? It's a collection of specific pieces of information or data. And again, normally you have like one class. So like we'd have a student class, and then you could populate student objects using the data that is found in this table. Okay, so I don't know, maybe to give you some more examples, non-student examples here. This is taken from an online program here. But you could basically, here would be sort of a set of data, really small set, but they would be clubs at a school, and they would have like the club name, their members, the number of meetings they have per month, and then the annual fee. And so sort of the data would be stored in this table, and then each one of these rows would represent one club object. Okay, so in our Java code, we would then need a club class to represent each like sort of row of data. So it might look something like this in Eclipse. So I didn't do the full class here, but basically you'd have an instance variable for each of the things shown, each of the each of the columns here in this table, right? For the club name, the members, the meetings per month, and the annual fee. So you'd make an instance variable for each of those, and then you'd have a constructor that allow you to construct instances of a club, and then you have get and set methods. Okay, so these would all then be the instances, and you would populate them by reading from a file, and then you could change them by writing to a file. So that's kind of what we're doing here in the beginning, is we're going to learn how to read and write data into a file so we can keep track of the information in our program. All right. As you can start to see, here would be some other examples. Here would be the inventory of like at a school, so you can see the different items, how many quantity, where their locations are. Okay. And then again, like once you have this data and you read it in the program, you can do useful things. Like, so if they ask, well, what questions could you ask? You'd say, are we out of any of these quantities, right? Or we could start to say, hey, I have a student here that wants to join a club, and can you give me a club where they meet 2 or less times per month? Right? Because the student maybe doesn't have a lot of time, or maybe they don't have a lot of money. So you could say, hey, can you give me a list of any clubs that don't have any fees? In this case, there wouldn't be any like that. But once you have the data, in your program, you can start to ask questions about it and produce like meaningful information for your users. Okay, and let me see if I can find another one here. So here's some quiz scores. So we can see here's the different students, and here's their score on these different quizzes, and then here's their average, right? And then we can start to ask questions about, like, as a teacher, I could say which kids are really struggling, which ones have a low average, and which ones do I need to focus on. And again, the first step here is you'd have to build sort of like a student object behind the scenes that you would use then to track their quiz scores. Okay, and just to show you this, this one I would structure maybe a little bit different behind the scenes. For a student, like the student their quizzes are, definitely have their name. Though in practice it would probably be first name and last name. But for whatever reason, they just have a first name here, which is kind of dumb. But then the quiz scores I would actually put in some sort of array, or maybe even array list, and then you wouldn't even really need to store this average because you could just calculate that based on the data that's in here, right? So that's the idea, is if I have some data in some sort of spreadsheet or something like that, then you build a corresponding class that represents sort of each row in this data set. Okay, and so again, we're going to want to work on storing them in files and then reading them for files. That's kind of the first goal here. And in order to do that, you need this special method called split, string.split, that is new on the AP exam here in 2025-26. Okay, so we're going to start to do how this string method works. And here's the description. So you're going to have a string name, so then you're just going to call like the name of the string, str.split, and you can split it you kind of split it into multiple little strings based on whatever you put here. And usually common things here might be a comma, a semicolon, a space. That's how you're going to split up your data how to differentiate where like one entry begins and one entry ends. Okay, and so this is pretty tricky to understand, but I'm just going to basically go through some examples here, and hopefully then it'll make more sense to you. But basically, then it returns an array list of strings. So on the other side of this, we would create an array list of strings, name it whatever, and then it would take a big string and split it up into little strings, separated, looking for a separator of, in this case, a comma. Again, this is kind of confusing, but I'm going to go through some examples here, and hopefully that'll make sense to you. Okay, so the first one here is I just have a text, which is these are the quarterbacks as of 2025 here in the NFC North. So I have Jordan Love, J.J. McCarthy, Caleb Williams, and Jared Goff. Okay, and so the idea is here's one big text, and there's commas separating their names. So what we do is we take that string, call .split on it with a comma, and then it automatically behind the scenes makes an array list, an array of word objects, or word strings, and splitting based on the comma. So what happens here is it'll actually have Jordan, JJ, Jared, and Caleb, because it kind of takes out the commas, and then it makes 4 separate strings, Jordan, JJ, Caleb. So when we run this, if you look, this second part here just loops through. Oh, sorry, I have to actually run the example. So I'm going to run example 1. That's main up there. I'm going to run it, and you can see that it actually just prints out Jordan, JJ, Jared, and Caleb. So it took this string, one big string, and split it into 4 separate strings, and the separator it used was the comma. Okay, so that's the idea of how the split works. Okay, so you can use different things here, right? So here's a really, really weird one, but like you could put a separator of J. So that would be really odd, but it would have a blank string first because there'd be nothing before this J. Then it would take everything from here up to the next J, which would be ORed in with a comma, I think. Let me run this just to see. Yeah, it takes a blank one that takes ORed in up to the comma. Then it finds this next J, and that's just like a blank string. And then it's going to run from here to here up to the next J. And then it's going to run all the way there, and there is no J at the end, so I think it'll run that whole thing in the last part. Okay, so that'd be really weird to do a separator of J and wouldn't really make any sense, obviously. But there, the comma is what makes sense. So I want to do a couple more examples and see if that helps. So here I have the same kind of idea, but it's split up differently. So if we were to want to split these into 4 separate strings of Jordan, JJ, Jared, and Caleb, my question is, what would you use here? What would be in the first example was a comma, what would you use here? So pause the video and try to figure it out. Okay, and so this one is just a space, which would be another common way to do it, is put a space between each name, and then you can get the one string of 4 names and turn it into 4 separate strings. Okay, and there's a lot, like you could do periods would be another sort of logical one. You could put a period here, and that would be a good way to separate them. And then all you have to do is when you call split it based on the period. And boom, there it works the same way. Okay, so my last one here is what would my text be? If I want to do text.split and separate by an underscore, what would the text look like if I have the same quarterbacks here? Pause the video, give it a shot. Okay, and so it would be the same sort of thing here, except the separator is now going to be underscores. So I'm going to just, not do that. I need to do the text, the same text as before, but just put underscores instead of spaces or periods or whatever we're splitting on. Okay, so there's a lot of ways you can separate this, separate data, but some common ones are commas, periods, underscores, spaces would all be good examples. And you can see if I run this, I should get the same thing. Okay, so I'm going to run example 3 here, and I do get the same thing. Right, so there we just had to put in underscores and then split it based on the underscore, and that gives you the same 4 strings as always. Okay, so this would be a good file for you to look back. I'll post it out on the website so you can look back if you need examples. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching.